then we'll share the main resource that we're using. We call these sessions Future Teacher Reactivated because we've run all these topics over the past few years before, and then these reactivated sessions is we're revisiting and updating, having new guest speakers that you'll hear from today. And so we're adding to what we've covered before and the resource and so on. We're using these kind of picture screens to differentiate between what was there before and what's new.
That's terrible. So you can't ignore people just
and so this is a summary of the reactivated sessions, more flipped, more focused on activities, and more rooted in real experience with the new guest speakers that we have, building on what was covered before. There's some guidance here in terms of following the links to our step-by-step guide to joining our virtual learning environment, which is a VLE called Pedit that our Norwegian partners have used. And there's a link here to the step-by-step guide so that after the session you could follow that and explore the journeys that we have for each of these topics. Lillian, you were going to talk about this, what people said during registration, weren't you?
Yeah, so basically I kind of looked through what people said they wanted to do when they registered for the session and collated them into themes. Not surprisingly, a lot of people have come here to look for best practice in collaborative activities. Quite a lot of people here want to find out things so they can support colleagues. And then most people want some ideas for how to teach interactively. Some people said, how can I present with more interactivity? So as teachers, others want to know how they can set more interactive tasks now that students are working at distance and online. Some people have asked for help with specific tools. I'm afraid that might not be covered directly here. But the main thing we want to share with you is our learning resource and the wisdom from our three speakers. And you'll find that there's a lot of theoretical underpinning already in that resource, as well as hints and signposts to great activities that you can try with learners. So something for everyone today.
Okay, so I think it's over to me now. So Ron, if we can go to slide 5. We're going to give you the link to this. In fact, perhaps we'll give you the link to this straight away in the chat pane. And this is being recorded if anybody's wondering there. So in the chat pane is the link here. So on slide 5, I've just, all I'm going to do is very quickly just let you know what we covered before, because there's some really important background information that you can look at in your own time, at your own pace. But first of all, we cover the benefits of collaborative learning, and we look at it in terms of activity, and there's a link there to a list of discussion techniques. The opportunities, the new opportunities for moving up the SAMR model. If you're not familiar with that, there's a link to that there. Quality of contributions. There's some really interesting work that suggests that collaborative learning actually helps to give deeper critical thinking on resources. Inclusion's another important element. We've got some examples there of the way in which collaboration can actually really improve inclusion opportunities for people with disabilities. Now, you have to be careful about your system because, of course, a technically inaccessible system may do the opposite, but there's some interesting things for you to look at there. Community, of course, is important. That's what we're doing at the moment, and the benefits, particularly in a time of isolation, of creating that community of practice is really not to be underestimated. And fundamentally, of course, knowledge construction, you know, real learning can take place. And so we've got lots of links there. On the next slide, what we've done there is we've tried to give you a sense of the way in which collaborative learning can actually unfold pedagogically. So it could be creating artifacts, it could be categorizing, prioritizing information and working together in order to do that. It could be problem solving and knowledge exchange. It could be role play. it could be participating in conversations and discussions. And for each of those, if you wanted to go and look at those in your own time, the following slides, and Ron will just click through these, and that's the link you've already got. Here, in our previous session, we actually ran it as a collaborative session where people were saying, this is how I have created some artifacts and resources collaboratively with my students, or the next slide, people giving lots of examples on how they categorized or prioritized, next slide, and so on. So you get the idea. So that takes us through to, I think, slide 11, yeah, the role play, the quests. Excellent. So there's five different slides there that you can go and you can look at what people in this future teacher community have already suggested and given examples of their work. So for the next one, 13, yeah, we're going to, Lillian will talk more about the further reading in a moment. So if I just go to the key resources part of this tab, we've made sure that we've underpinned this with as much kind of research and good practice as we found. So there's a range of links there, and on the left-hand side, there's a kind of summary, this is an annotated reading list really for you. The checklists and activities underneath that tab will give you some really useful resources that almost are like a checklist of things that you might do, things that you might explore with your students. And lastly, do remember under that rubrics thing, that if you're going to assess collaborative work, and we certainly encourage you to, to help students take it seriously by making it count towards things, then you need to think about the rubrics. So Lillian, over to you.
Okay, sorry. So I guess what we're wanting to highlight to people is that we've got this very rich resource, and when we're doing a bit of flipped learning, really, we're not running through the resource we ran through 2 years ago. But I wanted to highlight to people, as people are having to kind of prep materials for online, to also think about the underpinning pedagogy. There's the tools you need to kind of get to grips with, but there's also quite a lot of underpinning planning and design for online learning. So things we need to kind of be aware of when we're asking people to adopt online tools is to remember to plan for the social presence. It's not just about you teaching, but it's about everybody kind of learning together. It's a slightly different way of delivering learning. Making sure that you actually there cognitively, and also your teaching presence. Too much teaching presence can kill collaboration. So we just wanted to highlight to you this page to think about the amount of presence that you have in your community. And on the next slide, another little bit of underpinning information there about how you might assess collaborative work if it's the first time that you're introducing your students to things like discussion boards, or they're creating a document together. Are you going to assess it? And if you are, you might want to kind of think a little bit about the ways you're going to do that. And we have some links as well to rubrics from, I think it was on slide 13, but moving on to the next slide. Just whether working with millennials, whether their approach to collaboration is different. I think sometimes we take it for granted. They're always on their phones, they're always Snapchatting, they're always Instagramming, but that doesn't mean they know how to collaborate when they're learning. Okay, so that's quite a different thing. It's not about me, it's about listening to other people and taking something from that. And that's maybe a slightly different skill. So, if you pop into that page, you can just have a little reflection on what might be different in terms of working with millennials. Okay. So yes, I think we're ready to kind of go into the reactivated part of our session. And I think it's Wendy next as our guest speaker. Right, Wendy, if you're ready, we can actually let Wendy present from University of Sussex. She is going to share her screen and talk you through collaborative teaching and learning.
can't hear anything
Oh.
yet.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Can do, yeah, thank you.
Yes, okay. So yeah, I was just going to talk about one example of collaborative teaching and learning that we've used this year with foundation year students. So these are students that are studying psychology, business, social science, arts and humanities. Some of them are doing this module as an elective and some of them are doing it as a core module. But what we wanted to do was to sort of try and bring the students together to create this sort of sense of community in terms of the reading, because this was sort of one of the sticking points that we had was this problem where we had lots of shoe experts. So students would basically come to the seminar. I'm sure this is something we're familiar with at some point in our teaching career, where some of the students haven't read the paper. The ones who have are really often reluctant to put themselves forward. And then basically what happens is it turns into a mini lecture. So it tends to be very high teacher participation and very low student participation. And there's very little interactivity as well. So there really isn't that opportunity then for discourse or communication. There's no sort of purposeful engagement, and that's really where we wanted to sort of try and turn things around a little bit. And what we've been using is this tool called Chalice Elevate. So this is an example of what it looks like for students. So they see their reading on the left, and on the right, there's a column where the students can basically input any questions, any thoughts, any commentary. And they can do this basically sort of using highlighting. So if there's anything they don't understand, then they can basically just highlight that section and they can put their sort of comments and so on in the right hand side. And what it allows them to do is to comment anonymously as well. So if they really sort of are struggling in terms of having the confidence to come forward, they can actually just make their comment anonymous. So I as the teacher can see who it is, but for any other students, they can't identify who that student is. And that's been a really big help. We've had quite a mix really of students who have been quite happy to have their name put forward and others who have chosen to use that option. But what it basically allows them to do is to see in real time what other students are thinking about the paper, where students are sort of struggling, and they're sort of helping each other to try and work on that reading. So just to give you some examples, this I thought was sort of what I was expecting really in the initial stages. So there are quite a few questions where students are trying to help each other to clarify meaning. So things like, what does this mean? I think it means is a good method of teaching a subject. Oh yes, thank you, I got it now. So it, you know, really that collaboration in terms of just the basic level of understanding, that happens quite a lot. But we've also got some more impressive contributions. So for example, this is some student who wanted to know the evidence to which the sentence was referring to. So it's helping to extend their understanding beyond the basic paper. So really sort of generating that idea that actually this is interesting beyond just what this basic paper says. And perhaps sort of the most impressive type were these ones where students had really sort of gone into a much deeper level of discussion around certain issues in the paper. So this one was a paper looking at how death by PowerPoint was really not the way forward, and that we should be using more sort of visual imagery to try and get students to really think beyond the basic text-based delivery of information. And it stimulated some incredible conversations. We sort of looked at things like whether we're becoming too reliant on visual information now. So eventually, further down the line, will it be the case that we become as sort of immune to learning from visual information as we are from text, just reading lots and lots of text. It created some fantastic discussions. I think my feeling is that I learned as much from this as the students were learning from the actual, you know, sort of the initial paper. It really sort of led to some great conversations. And I think that is one of the real benefits, is that it allowed them to sort of consider other responses, which then fed into much deeper discussions in the seminar itself. So it really gave them a board to sort of collaborate on before the actual face-to-face meeting. And one of the things with the Chalice Elevate software is that you can use it for all sorts of things. So at the moment, I've primarily used it for the reading. So actually just posting the reading into this software and allowing them to collaborate on that. But it's possible to also use it for videos, and you can also use it for images as well. So students can click on various parts of the image and post their own discussion responses and ideas there. In terms of feedback, hopefully you can see there's quite a range of feedback from the students. Really, really positive. I could have easily filled 4 or 5 different slides with all the feedback. It was overwhelmingly positive, and most of the feedback pointed to the idea that they liked that option of being able to see what other students were saying about the reading, being able to read other people's questions and responses before they then contributed themselves. And I think that's something that really sort of added an extra dimension to what we did then in the seminars, because they were no longer sort of mini lectures. We really had dealt with the questions before they arrived, and we'd explored some of the more interesting issues. I could see, for example, where their interests were going with the particular topic. And then in the seminars, it meant that we had a little bit more free time to sort of explore those issues, rather than just stick with the, you know, did everybody understand the paper type of response. For anybody with particular interest in sustainability, this is a particularly interesting piece of feedback, because that came through from a number of students, was the fact that they could see in real time what they were doing with the papers meant they didn't have to keep printing out papers and annotating it separately. And I think one of the added advantages there is they can actually use this to make their own personal notes. So if they don't want to see everybody else's comments, they can just literally switch to a personal note setting, and they can do the same thing for themselves, highlighting the text, and just at the side in that right hand window they can actually put their own notes. And we've had over 5,000 personal notes made, and this is just on a trial of this. So it has really quite dynamically changed the way that we're collaborating together. Really, in terms of this as a collaborative tool, really just we're going to try and use it more and more, because it has so much potential to build these sorts of communities of practice within the student groups. They're really collaborating and helping each other a lot more before they actually come along to the seminar. So it does mean that active learning is much more on the agenda now than it ever was before, because we're sort of building on their learning rather than trying to establish their learning in the first place. They're doing that themselves. It's particularly interesting because I haven't actually sort of had that much input into the discussions. We had one seminar at the beginning where we all explored it to make sure they knew how to log on, how to use it. But from that point on, I've really let it be a student-led facility, and they've really just taken it and run with it. So the majority of the responses that have been given are really sort of from the students themselves. So it has really helped to sort of create that sense of community, collaboration, and it has really helped them to sort of look more deeply at the issues rather than just the basic level, you know, do you know your stuff? Now it's really, what do you think about the stuff that you've learned? And that's changed our sort of focus. So some of the contributions have been fantastic. I mean, really sort of the sorts of contributions you might expect maybe from a postgraduate cohort. I can hear the little bell ringing, so I think I'm pretty much done there. So I'll finish at that point.
Thanks very much, Wendy. We've got some questions for you from the delegates who were listening to you. So Fiona was asking whether this practice throws up any problems for students who are dyslexic or have any special learning difficulties.
I mean, not, if anything, it's really been a benefit for those students, because I think one of the issues that we've had sort of previously is when we're doing the face-to-face seminars, that they are required to be quite spontaneous and quite verbally agile. Whereas this gives them a little bit more confidence, because they can contribute to it sort of in their own time. They can read what everybody else has put. It gives them that opportunity to sort of work through it in their own time, but in the sense of a community response. So my feeling is really that that's been a sort of a benefit rather than a difficulty.
Okay, that's brilliant.
On a related question, Sian did ask about whether there's accessibility settings that would allow people to change font size or colours. Do you know that quickly?
I'm not 100% sure on that. I think at the moment there isn't, but certainly something that Chalice would be able to respond to.
Okay.
They're adapting it all the time, and it gives you lots of analytics which themselves have developed a lot over the past sort of 6 months. So I'm sure that's something that's being looked at if it isn't available already.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, so I think in the chat as well, we've all been discussing the fact that there are other possible tools like hypothesis, and we have a case study of that in one of our learning resources on reading, I think, that's coming up next month, if I'm not wrong, Alistair. Other tools that we've been using for a long time are things like Digo, as a social bookmarking tool that also allows annotation, and again that's linked in the chat. So Emma Dodd is from Chalice. Yep, she's added her email address there. If anyone wants to contact either Wendy or Emma, feel free to get in touch. So our next guest speaker is Debbie Spencer. Is it Debbie Spencer next, Ron? I can't see where we're at with this. I've just got Debbie and Debbie. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, Debbie Spencer first.
Okay, Debbie Spencer first. Thank you. Yes. So I'll just hand over to Debbie Spencer, and she can share her screen as well.
Thanks. Sorry, I started coughing. That's why I had to mute myself. Okay. So can we hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
And is that the right screen? Which screen are you seeing?
No, you need to share the other one.
Okay. Oh, there it is. There we go. That should be right.
Okay, I think it's ready for you to click on.
Yeah, are we there? Lovely. Hi, I'm Debbie Spencer. I'm here from University of Central Lancashire up in Preston to talk about the experience I've had using blogs for student assessment and the sort of tools that I use for that, and how that has developed in the last couple of years. So it's very much about student assessment. It's very much about looking at digital tools and digital platforms for student assessment. And all of this is done within the platform of Microsoft Teams. We use that alongside our Blackboard VLE, but we use Microsoft Teams as well, and everything's embedded in there. So we're using a lot of those digital tools to provide this. As a formative assessment, the students on this particular module I'm talking about, which is transcultural health and social care, is using the Flipgrid video blogging app, where the students develop a very short video, and they share that with each other, they feed back to each other, and there's peer review within that assessment process. So these students are all nursing students. They are either on pre-registration or post-registration courses or international top-up. So it is a mixed group. Sometimes, as this last time, was quite small numbers, but it's still looking at that mixed pedagogy for those students. The summative assessment is done using SWAY. So the Flipgrid is where they develop their ideas for the video blog around transcultural health and social care and how it relates to their practice. And then they develop a SWAY presentation, which forms the summative assessment. And both of these artifacts are peer reviewed by students. So they're sharing it within Flipgrid, they're sharing it within Teams, and they're commenting back to one another in relation to how their work is developing, and they're able then to develop their own individual work based around those sorts of comments that they're getting from each other. All of this has to tie in with the learning outcomes. There's no change there with assessment. It's very much about meeting the learning outcomes within the final submission that they do submit. And we have a strong use of Turnitin in our organisation, and I was not concerned, but sort of wondering, how do I do this with SWAY? But SWAY has an option to export to Word, and they just submit that to Turnitin in terms of originality. But I have to find there's very little match up with originality with this type of assessment, because they are using creativity to develop this work. It has to be evidence-based, but there's much less originality. It's much more individual to the students. In terms of student feedback, it's been extremely positive. The students, these are just the comments that I've had back, an example of the sorts of things they've said to me. And I have to say, having been teaching 30 years now in higher education within nursing and healthcare, I've never actually been asked for a feedback form. It's always something that you're sort of trying to get feedback from students, but that was the case here. They really wanted to give us the feedback on how they'd found the experience. In Teams, we find that that's a really useful one-stop shop for students to access all the resources we're using. So there's no multiple logins, it's just one login. There's a link to their Blackboard VLE in there as well, so they really don't have to go anywhere else. And it's all on multiple devices as well, so whatever they're using. And Microsoft Teams don't pay me. Sounds like I'm advertising for them. So yes, thinking about the student feedback, what I've found as well in this process is there was a marked increase in engagement in the teaching and learning events. The attendance on the module, which was delivered on campus, was really 100%. And this module is one alongside a suite of option modules on the pre-registration nursing programme as one group of students that I had. And all my other option module tutors were having difficulties with attendance, having issues with people coming into class or engaging with the materials. And I have to say, I never had that. They were all very engaged and liked that creativity, and the way things were done were different. I found they really used the resources a lot. There's a lot of interaction in between sessions on the discussion within Teams, sharing of resources, sharing of ideas, you know, posting up some articles that they'd come across, posting up an experience that they'd had, and then all getting involved in that discussion. And that fed into the Flipgrid blogs and the SWAY blogs at the end. So this is just a screen to show you what the Flipgrid looks like. This is just one of the grids, and the students can post their videos, and the little ones alongside are where they've videoed back to one another to say how they're what they think about the presentation. And these are very short, just 1 minute 30 seconds, which is why this person here decided she had to do 3, because she had so much to say, which is fantastic. Rushing along, the pedagogy behind this, I mean, this is just one piece of work that was done by Papastradru and colleagues looking at blogging to facilitate education in nursing, and they identified with these 4 key areas for using blogs, and the analysis of these 4 themes. This was the outcome of the analysis of the 4 themes from the data. They reviewed blogs of 260 bloggers with 372 comments, so 632 writings that they analysed in terms of the blogs and how they felt they developed the course content, new knowledge, changing the views, reflection and critical thinking, and I'll come back to reflection, encouragement of peer support, and I certainly found a lot of that within the group, and been able to share their feelings, experiences and expectations. Now the next slide is a bit busy, but it's really just showing that piece of research and how they got down from the themes that they identified to the 4 areas that I've just had on that previous slide. But thinking about reflection, and in nursing and lots of other disciplines, we've been using reflection for some time, and what we know about reflection is about, you know, there's a cognitive process, there's an emotional process involved in reflection, and reflection in action, reflection on action. In nursing for decades we've been using reflection and using it as part of our assessment. But I can certainly relate to this work by Levine in terms of the intense reflection that participants develop when they're using something a little different. And I found that the creativity of using Flipgrid and using Sway provides that more intense reflection of the concepts that they are looking at. And from my own perspective, I can relate this and map it to Bloom's hierarchy in that they are looking at concepts, they're investigating them. There's a degree of reflexive analysis that goes on within what they're doing, and they're sharing that with one another. And this sharing and peer review is one of the critical parts of the process, in that they're not learning alone. They are collaborating, but they're not collaborating in a way that maybe we've had people collaborating in the past, where they're producing one output. These are all producing very unique and individual outputs, but just getting that feedback from one another. And it really does develop new thinking in relation to, from my perspective on the modules I'm running, how they relate that to their clinical practice, and how they relate the concepts of, in this case, transcultural health and social care to the care of the patients that they are looking at. And it really is that intense reflection that Levine talks about. It's the depth of critical thinking. It's the need to be creative that develops those higher thinking skills, which I see mapping against Bloom's taxonomy. So the key messages, I think, are about the importance to identify the best way to optimize teaching and learning and assessment. One size doesn't fit all. It is about looking at the learning outcomes and making sure that the approach is definitely supposed to be meeting that. It's also about looking at what's the potential for flipped pedagogy. We've been thrust actually into this situation currently where we're having to move everything over to digital because of what's happening today with COVID. But it is, you know, moving forward will definitely work differently, and I think the digital technologies really do help that. But it's always coming back to what are those learning outcomes and how's the best way to achieve it. And also, you know, learning should be fun. Why shouldn't it be enjoyable? Why shouldn't it be fun to actually do? And have a little dance here like Baby Groot is. Just been watching Guardians again and again and again recently, so you know, there you go. And someone mentioned inclusivity in that previous, or asked about inclusivity, and we have a strong inclusivity agenda at UCLan, as with many others will. But I find that the flexibility and the creativity really does enable that. So the last slide here is really for you to actually be able to have a go at using Flipgrid. I've set up a Flipgrid for this session. You can just scan that QR code or go to that web link there, and you will be presented with a grid. There's a green button where you can record. There's some questions there about share your experiences of using blogs, And do you think that blogging helps develop the students' knowledge and critical thinking? So that's just a space for you to actually have a go and see what you think. Now, I was going to share a couple of the sways as well, but I've probably run out of time. But if Lillian thinks that'd be helpful, I can do that as well. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much, Debbie. That's brilliant. There've been quite a lot of questions coming up as you've been explaining what you've been doing. I love that. This is improving engagement and reaching out to more critical thinking as well. So that's really nice to hear. So Sian had a question about how they submit the sway. Is it a link on their OneDrive, or are you taking a copy?
No, so they submit the link to their sway on Teams. So the Microsoft Teams is set up with different channels, and there's a channel for their sway presentations. And so they link them on there, and they all then look at each other's and they can comment back. But then in sway, there's an option to export the sway as either a PDF or a Word file. And then that is what they submit to Turnitin, and that's really only for me to be able to provide the feedback and the grading.
Okay.
And that's how we do that.
That's brilliant. And Caroline wanted to know what Flipgrid is used for. I think several people here are using Flipgrid, and it's one of those things, if you use it all the time, you take it for granted. But I've described it as a video-based discussion board. Would you say that was accurate? Or
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's simply, Flipgrid is a video-based grid, they call them. And so you set up a grid, and like I've done here, for you to have a go at, and by all means just go and have a play with it, because that's really why I've set this up. And these are the questions, you set questions to the people you want to use it. So I've just put a couple of things there, and you're then you record a video blog on that site, and as the person setting it up, I determine how long that can be. So it can be anything from 90 seconds. It's actually gone up this week, it's now up to 10 minutes. You can have different timings for how long you want people to talk for. And then once that's up in that previous, I'll go back to the slide that has the grid. So this is what the grid looks like, and so you can see the big green button. You just tap on that, it opens up your camera and enables you to record your video. It stops at the time of whatever I've allowed it, and then you're able to post that and obviously use smileys and other stuff like that, as you can see on there. And when you listen to somebody's recording, you can then reply by doing another video back to that, which is where the little buttons alongside the people's faces are, where someone's replied to them.
Okay, so that's great. Thank you very much. So I think we're kind of tight on time, but there's another question you could answer in the chat maybe as we start to move on. Phil had a question about students can opt out of Teams. Is that true? Someone was asking whether Flipgrid cost any money. And someone was talking about whether Flipgrid worked with deaf or VI students, but someone else has answered, yes, you can use the whiteboard, Blackboard tools. So if you would like to answer some of those in the chat while we invite Debbie Bath to start her session, that would be really good.
Thank you very much. Excellent. I would, if you could do a little bit more about the accessibility element, that would be great as well, because I'd be interested in knowing a bit more. So in the chat would be fantastic. Debbie.
Okay, that's great. I hope everybody can hear me okay.
Very well,
yep.
Yeah.
That's great.
Excellent, that's lovely. Thanks ever so much. It's quite disconcerting because I've got two different screens. So I'm looking on one screen and following on another. So just bear with me while I jump from one to the other. Okay, so great to be here. Thanks everyone. My name's Debbie Bath and I'm the Membership and Professional Development Manager at ALT. It's great to see in the chat, I was looking at people's names. I've spotted quite a few names of people that I recognise in the chat, and also a lot of people that I've not met yet. So it's nice to be among friends, particularly at the moment. I'm sure we're all feeling a little bit unsettled with everything going on. So I've been asked to talk about my perspective, really, which is just to give you a bit of an sort of a rundown of some of the experiences that I've had. So I thought I'd just tell you quickly about my background and my professional interest, and then look at sort of why I think that collaborative learning online is a different mindset, and why I really think that, you know, we need to kind of embrace our vulnerability, really. And then I've also got some top tips that I've shared with you. You might find as well at the end that there should be a link to a Padlet where I've collated some resources that have been shared recently, so you might find that useful. So really, I've got a couple of different sort of hats when I talk about collaborative online learning. I'm a PhD student at the moment at Lancaster University, and I recognise at least one person on this list, Catherine. So she's one of my my fellow members on the cohort there. And I'm looking at online social collaborative learning in my my PhD research, but also because I work for ALT and we're a distributed organisation. I deal a lot with professional development for our members, so I've got that kind of aspect to it. We do everything online, and also I've been working in higher education for, it's more than 25 years now, I think, but quite a long time, where I've done various things from, you know, on the administration side, the managerial side, and also as an associate lecturer as well. So I've kind of seen it from lots of angles. And most of my studying that I've done online as well. So culminating in the MA in online distance education with the OU that I did a few years ago. So there's quite a lot of different kind of angles that I come at it from. And I'm also involved in a lot of different online communities. I'm sure some of you will recognise some of these things that are on here. Learning and Teaching HE chat, this sort of weekly Twitter chat that happens on a Wednesday. Things like the Open Education Special Interest Group, which is an ALT group that we meet together and discuss open educational resources and open educational practice. Other things like the GoGN is a global OER graduate network. And that is a network that I'm involved with in relation to my open practice for my PhD studies. So there's lots of different kind of different people that come in, and kind of there's a lot of research as well that looks at different bridges, people acting at bridges between different communities. So I'm considering all of these aspects when I'm looking at it. And I'm sure that going through what we're going through now with all the current crisis with the COVID-19 stuff, that a lot of these communities are actually going to become really, really important. So the reason I was kind of thinking that from my perspective, you really need a different mindset. So from this aspect, really, I suppose listening skills are really the thing that that is key for me. It's got to be paramount. You've got to be really deliberate in your communications with learners when they're learning online. I find this myself kind of tricky at the moment. When I said about the different screens that I'm looking at, because of the way that this is set up, I can't see the chat at the moment, so I don't know what the chat is going on, and I would normally like to be able to see the chat and kind of interact with it as I was going along. I'm also a big advocate kind of for really bringing people into conversations early on in things, and actually taking the opportunity to learn from people as you're going along. The thing is, you don't have to do everything all in one go. You know, I think we need to take the time to kind of think about the scene and establish some ground rules and cover how the technology works. And also we need to know ourselves. We don't really need to have all the answers, particularly at the minute. Technology does go wrong. I like to think that we'd see it as a learning opportunity, and we can sort of learn together with our learners and try and establish trust. There's lots of things that's been talked about earlier that Debbie and Wendy were talking about in ways that you can establish trust online with people. So, I mean, think about our mindsets when we're doing collaborative online learning. And I think you've got to be more prepared to feel vulnerable, because you might feel exposed as a tutor, as a lecturer, particularly if you feel your digital skills are not up to scratch. And I've found that being open and honest about whether or not you've used that particular tool that you're using can help. You know, your learners are also going to feel vulnerable. I think it's really important to find out what their prior experiences. So some people won't have learned online before. Some people are going to be feeling anxious. Other people might have been using it before and they're quite familiar, but it might be a different tool that you're using. And again, sharing your own experiences can help in kind of making people feel a bit more at ease. And in terms of communicating online as well, I think it's really important that we're really specific. So explaining exactly what you want learners to do. And this is really evident at the minute. Obviously, I've got 2 teenage children. They're at home doing homeschooling because of all the schools have been shut. And there's a real distinct difference between the 2 age groups. One is 12 and one is 15. And on the one hand, I see a set of resources that are really clear. It's really good explanations, lots of multimedia, lots of video, really well thought through. But of course, that may be that particular tutor has already thought through this stuff and was using Google Classroom anyway, and didn't have to suddenly to produce loads of stuff overnight. I mean, unfortunately, some of the other resources that I've seen are, quite lacking in terms of, it's all very, very heavy text-based. There's lots of chat from students on there kind of saying, well, we really don't know what we're supposed to be doing with this. Am I supposed to be doing all of this in this one lesson? Is this to be done within the next couple of lessons? How do I submit? Lots of kind of unsettledness, really. So I think it's really important that we're specific, that we really think about what we're asking people to do online, and don't overwhelm people with too much information. Baby steps. I also think as well that it's really important to share stories and listen to what people are saying. And, this is what I was talking about with the text chat and things like that. You can really bring the text chat alive by using people's names and picking up on their text comments, either during live sessions like this or referring back to a point that someone's made earlier. It can really make people feel valued and understood. So hence why I would normally be looking at the chat screen now and trying to see who said what. I hope you're agreeing with me and nodding furiously, but we'll have a quick look at that afterwards. Where else was I going to talk? I was also going to talk about things about technology with people. Obviously, no 2 learners are necessarily going to have the same technology in their household. They're accessing on lots of different devices. They've got different experience with online collaboration. And they won't necessarily have the same tech that you've got. So just because it's easy for you to do something, it might not necessarily be easy for them to do it. And for an example, when a few years ago, when I was working on writing a MOOC with some trainee teachers, they were trainee teachers at the university, and I was working with them to really gather their experiences. So in order to kind of say, well, what would you have liked to have known before you started university? So that we could then prepare this MOOC to help develop people's survival skills before they started. So I thought, it'd be a great idea. Get all of these trainee teachers in. As we know, trainee teachers tend to be really kind of open to lots of ideas. And they were great. They were really, really good. And I set up all these things for them to collaborate online. But in my head, it would be easier because we had an online platform. This was a long time ago. This was before Zoom and things like this. But we had an online platform where I think it might have been Hangouts in the early days, where we could communicate online using video. But what I wanted to do was to capture the information kind of live as we were going. So I came up with a bright idea of using an Etherpad. I don't know if anyone remembers the Etherpads. And I kind of set it up and sent them the link and said, this is great. So we can chat along and then we can capture all of the stuff that we're doing online live. The difficulty was I had 2 screens. None of these students had 2 screens. They were accessing it off their phone. They were accessing it off a mobile or off a laptop, all of these things. And they were like, well, how am I supposed to type on this Ethernet and actually have a discussion with you at the same time? So that was a real learning moment for me. I kind of thought, right, I must remember that, when I'm talking to people, they don't necessarily have the same equipment. So I suppose really putting yourself in the shoes of the learner and how it feels to be on the other side of the screen, explaining how your platform works and where to go for help, in relation to finding out, how do I sort my mic out? How do I sort my video out? What does the text chat do? You know, consider recording a screen capture to help people navigate their way around things. And I suppose above all, really, it's the learning together aspect is a more of a facilitation type role. I got 1 minute left, we're nearly there, don't worry. So yes, I think for me, it's a more vulnerable way of learning. These are my top 10 tips. I've talked about all of these things in terms of using your webcam, being specific. In terms of things like online social learning presence that we mentioned earlier on, there's lots of different things that you can do. To, you know, you can use Bitmojis, you can put your face on camera, you can refer to people by their name, you can share your stories, all sorts of things like that will help. As I said, that's my kind of mantra: people first, tech second, be human. It's that, you know, that is going to get us through all of this. So there we go. I just put my Padlet on there for you. I've pulled that together from some really, really helpful resources that people have shared. So if you want to know more about learning online, have a look at that.
Excellent, Debbie, and I love that mantra. I think that's a really good mantra to work with students, and indeed to work with anybody or anything. So Ron, I think you're doing the wrap up.
I am. Great that Debbie didn't promote everyone should join Alt if they're not a member, but I'll put the link in there. You really ought to join Alt if you're not a member. We usually finish off with a bit of an activity, so I'm going to rush through these final slides so that there's an activity still for everybody to do. We have a slide here that talks you through step by step how to enroll on our project VLE. It's a VLE called Padlet. So for some people that will be worth joining just to explore a different virtual learning environment. But we have these mini courses that we call journeys on there, and this page in the Xerte resource talks you through how to enroll on that, and you can explore those resources. They cover most of the topics that we've covered in the webinars, but extend those things with additional activities and additional resources and so on. This is a page about us, and if anybody would like to explore further using the Future Teacher resources and running CPD sessions in their own organisations, then we'd be keen to hear from you and work with you if you don't have the resources in-house to do that. But we share all the resources, as you will have seen, freely available, including downloads, so you can make your own use of those things as well. We have a mailing list if you haven't already joined, and there's a link there to join that. But also would be keen to hear from you, like we've heard from our brilliant guest speakers today, if you'd like to be a guest speaker on the next session, which is all about strategies to support reading. So please do contact us either via the mailing list or via the links that are in the various resources to share your idea of doing a guest slot on the next one. So the activity, I'll just move on to the very last slide. We use Xerte to create these resources that we present with, and the guest speakers have used PowerPoint that's embedded in the Xerte resource. So there's a page there about the Xerte resource and why we use it, and a link to the link and so on. So the next, the final activity that we ask you to do before you sign out is just to share what one thing you will do as a result of attending the session today and what you've heard from everybody. Now don't try and respond on my screen that I'm sharing now. You need to do that in the Xerte resource, and I'll put a direct link in the text chat to doing that. And the other thing that's a tip there on the screen, that when you type in your response and hit submit, give it a moment. It might not appear immediately. There's no need to type again or hit submit again unless you've got another comment to add, and then obviously you can retype that and submit that. So they should appear live as you start typing those in. I'll just refresh my screen to see if there's any responses so far. But as I say, we'd like you to just share what you will do and be as specific as possible. It's kind of taken for granted that you might explore the resources again, but if there's one kind of key thing, topic, new thing to explore that you've heard about, then perhaps put more specific details about that. Alistair, Lillian, have you got any further comments to make while people are doing that?
No, I think in the chat it's this is collaborative learning, isn't it? All the links that people have shared between each other, they've all answered questions while our speakers have been chatting. So you know, this is that kind of resource that we're all co-creating together, and you know, the fact that we record it and then make it available afterwards doesn't just benefit the people who couldn't join us because we hit the 100 mark, but it's useful for all of us to go back and review as well. So really appreciate everybody joining in and sharing their links and their knowledge.
I should add that if the embedded text wall isn't working for everybody, then type your response to that in the text chat instead. Because at the moment, if I refresh my screen, I'm not seeing the text wall embedded. So there may have been something gone wrong with that. So if you're not seeing that, if you've got the same problem, try typing your response in the text chat instead, which some people are doing anyway.
Technology, eh?
The text wall is just struggling a little bit, I think, with the numbers.
I think it will update at some point when everyone's with the numbers that are filling it.
I've got to say, I've got a practice Flipgrid that I can dig out and some blog posts as well. So I'll share those if anybody wants to have a play with Flipgrid.
That'd be great. Yep.
Cool.
So I would like to say a very big thank you to the three speakers on behalf of everybody. Virtual clapping and virtual hugs are okay because we won't catch anything with that. But so thank you very much to the three of you, but also anybody, as Ron said, anybody who would be interested in contributing to your own experiences to next session. We're looking at reading in the broadest sense, so not teaching people to read, but supporting academic reading, supporting people in reading effectively, productively. So there's a bit of kind of accessibility in there, there's a bit of assistive technology in there, there's a bit of good learning design in there, a whole range of ways. If you've got any experiences of supporting students in order to help them become more confident, effective, productive, and critical readers, we'd like to hear from you.
And I think, you know, people are curious, aren't they, about how to use different tools for different purposes. And what we've done is demonstrate how you can use Zoom and how you can use Xerti so that people can actually respond or interact while they're live in a webinar. And hopefully that will help the people who said they wanted to kind of gain some ideas of how to do something interactively, you know, to be teaching and presenting, but actually having that interaction as well. And someone else noted that it does really help to have a sidekick. And it could be a student that you nominate to monitor the chat. But the best advice I can give you if you're doing it on your own is to make sure you have a bell like Alistair does, but a digital one that pings every 10 minutes, stops you talking, look through the chat, respond to people, and then carry on. If you build in those breaks where you're responding to learners, they will interact a lot more.
There's a question there from Roz about an alternative to Xerti, and also Lillian mentioned about we're using Zoom, and we do get kind of, it gets a bit kind of confusing when you're referring to product names like we've been talking about today with Flipgrid and so on. Really, it's the generic, you know, Zoom, Read, any conferencing tool really. And in terms of Xerti, yes, we promote and use Xerti quite a lot, but any tool that you could create interactive resources with and make them available online. Many presentations use a PowerPoint that you can see and you can view when the presenter is presenting, but there's no interaction. Apart from maybe the text chat and so on. And the reason we use Xerti is that often we'll embed other interactions, and also that people can view it instantly after the webinar or during the webinar. So that's one of the reasons we use those kind of tools, but the specific tools are less important than the actual practical use of those things, aren't they?
Thanks, Debbie, for that. Another nice link for us to try out.
So at this point, we normally stop the recording and then have a more informal chat as people are leaving. Alistair, Lillian, should we stop the recording now or?
Yep.
Yeah.
Recording
Yeah.
go? Okay.
Bye all.